Church. How are you doing? There's a lot happening out in the world, including my fault for not checking with the lyrics soon enough. Well, first, see, I'm a little discombobulated. We all come in this space in different head spaces and heart spaces, and what I like to do is take a unifying breath so that we just are here in this moment, in this space, whatever is happening. So let's take a deep breath in and release. And will you stand for this first song? And what I was going to say, the first time we sing the chorus, we're singing He Leads Me. The second time we sing the chorus, we're going to sing She Leads Me. And then the last chorus, we're singing You Lead Me, straight to God. So the words are all going to say he, but just listen when you get there. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green, green pastures. He leads me beside the calmest of waters, and He restores my soul, and He restores love restoring our soul, no matter what's going on in the world. will ever rise again, if we'll ever be made whole again. And you say, yes, we will, and you don't care that we're still full of questions. Thank you for your love that restores and rebuilds and wins. We love you, Jesus. Amen.
Welcome, Life Church. My name is Holly, and we are so glad that you are here. Life Church is a safe place to explore faith. If you showed up today believing God, church, and faith are things that ground you and give you hope, you are welcome. If you joined us here today with some hesitation, some nervousness, wondering if there's anything here for you, you are welcome. You are welcome with your questions, with your hopes, curiosities, doubts. Whatever brought you here today, we're so glad you joined us. We ask you to please take a moment and fill out the digital connection card that can be found on the Life Church app. Whether you're joining us in person or online, you can use the connection card to let us know you're here, and it's an excellent way to give us feedback, share a prayer, or ask for more information. If you haven't already downloaded the Life Church app, you can find it free anywhere you get your apps. Simply search Life Church Lancaster. For those of you who have financially invested in Life Church, thank you. We could not do what we do without your generosity. If you would like to give today, you can check out the Giving tab on the Life Church app for the multiple ways you can give. Thank you for your investment in our community. So we have something fun coming down the pike. On Tuesday, July 19th, mark your calendars, at 7 p.m., we'll be hosting a worship night here at church. The children are welcome. There will not be childcare provided. They are welcome into the service with you, and you can expect an evening of singing, prayer, and renewal. The service will run from 7 to 8:30, so make sure you join us then. So we're so glad, again, that you are here, and hope you enjoy the rest of your morning with us. Thank you.
Let us love, comes the invitation from the beloved community. That community following Jesus so long that defined their whole beings by it. Let us love little children. They encouraged each other as if this love was something that was yet unknown and needed to be practiced, like a baby carefully watching the footsteps of others until she finally discovers her own feet can move in this way, wobbly and imperfect, but still walking, still following in the way. Let us love little children, not in word or in speech, but as if our whole bodies are learning this new grace. Let us be bold in learning this new movement, for we will falter, and it won't be perfect, just as we are not perfect. Little children, it will feel new and awkward, and it should. It should feel strange to twist and turn our bodies into love's possibility, to learn how to love in the way of Christ, who is still trying to encourage us to love one another. Let this be what defines us now, in this moment. Not so that they will know that we are Christians, but so that we know who that God's love abides. God's love abides in me. God's love abides in you. I am in you, and you are in me, and this changes everything. That is our prayer right now, that we will come to believe enough that God's love abides in us and be so changed. O Christ, may it be so.
Good morning, Life Church. How are you? My name is Mindy, and I'm the pastor here at Life Church, and I'm so glad that you have chosen to spend this morning with us. We have a lot happening in our world, and it's good to be with you to process and learn and hear. You're joining us in the middle of our connection series here at Life Church. In this series, we've been remembering and exploring the idea of connection, our connection to God, ourselves, and to one another. As human beings, we live and breathe this very same air. We come from and return to dust, just like every other person who ever existed. What does it mean, and how does our view of the world change when we choose to remember that we are deeply, deeply connected? So far in our series, we've talked about connection to ourselves. We've talked about connection to God. We've talked about our connection to our earthly and heavenly Father. And today, we're exploring our connection to our nation. As we sit here today, we all have connection to our nation. We're involved in a world shaped by our nation and its policies and structures of governance. Our context is our nation. We had no idea when we scheduled this Sunday for Greg to share with us that our Supreme Court would be handing down a reversal of Roe v. Wade 48 hours before Greg spoke to us. What do we believe about that? And how does our faith impact it? And how are our relationships impacted by what we believe about our nation's leadership and how leadership works? This is huge. This morning, we have the incredible opportunity to hear from Dr. Greg Carey. Greg has been a solid, faithful, supportive, and encouraging friend to Life Church over the last year. And if you've been here over the last 8 months, you've learned from him already. You've probably heard him talk about the Bible or community or how to work things out in community and relationship. And you've probably asked him a few questions. If you haven't, please do. He loves people. He loves to talk. He loves people. He loves interactions. So stop him in the lobby if you have not already done so. He would love to talk with you. He's a professor of New Testament at Lancaster Theological Seminary in the city. And this morning, I am sure he is going to give us a word that we need to hear. Thank you, Greg, for sharing your knowledge and your insight with us. And may we all be spurred on to greater truth and love as a result of our time this morning.
He loves to talk. Fair. Good morning. It's so good to see faces that are familiar to me now and faces that are new to me here and faces that are familiar to me from other places. It's good to see all of you, and for those whom I can't see, welcome and blessing to you as well. Yes, we're talking about my topic, Christian nationalism, today. And when I received the invitation to talk about this, I expressed some hesitation because there's no way to dodge partisan politics in talking about it. I won't be heavy on that because that's not my primary understanding of what my role is or what worship is about. But there's no avoiding it in telling the truth in a timely way. And so there we go with that. I'd like to begin, though, by putting what I want to share. I'm not an expert about Christian nationalism. I read a lot and pay close attention, but there are real experts. But I do want to share that what I have to say, I think, is well-grounded in research that's out there in history and in political science and in sociology. I want to start by getting sort of to the core of things in the gospel. We'll see how we're doing. Click. To me, this is fairly close to the core of who we're called to be as followers of Jesus. Paul writes that we're called to freedom, but not to use our freedom as an opportunity for self-indulgence, but through love to become enslaved to one another. For the whole law, Paul writes, is summed up in a single commandment: you shall love your neighbor as yourself. I don't know how to get more core to who we are called to be in the world than as folks who live in freedom but express that freedom for the sake of others. And in the context of our national politics, where there's a lot of language about freedom, but what do people use freedom to mean? In Christian nationalism, freedom means people like me doing what we want to do. It doesn't mean using our freedom to serve others, to heal others, or to include others. The problem, this is where I'm going to start theologically, and then I'm going to try to illustrate it. The problem with Christian nationalism is that a small group of Christians wants to dominate society. And when I say a small group of Christians, what I mean is they claim that their politics and their social values are Christian. But if you study their politics and their social values, these Christians who theologically align very closely to black Protestants, believe most of the same things, pray most of the same ways, talk about God and the Bible and Jesus in most of the same ways, on social and political issues, their opinions couldn't be farther apart on the spectrum of people who live in this country. In other words, there are lots of Christians in the United States who don't share their values about how we could organize our society, what the law should be, how we should organize their priorities. They claim to represent all of us and to impose their values on the rest of us. The problem is the desire to use freedom to dominate. And I'll try to document that. But I'll start here. Because this image captures the movement in a way I can't think of another that does. You may remember in the summer of protest concerning police violence against African American, mostly men, but women too, with protests getting heated in Washington, then President Donald Trump had security clear a path to St. John's Episcopal Church near the Capitol and processed there and posed with a Bible. What you see here is the Bible and a church. By the way, the church leaders later said, the Bishop of the Diocese of Washington said, he wasn't welcome here. The Bible being used as a prop in a political conflict. Why do I say as a prop? It wasn't his Bible. He didn't have a Bible of his own in the White House. He doesn't read the Bible. When he was asked to name his favorite Bible verse, his reply was, as happens from all Bible-loving Christians, he said, "Oh, I like all of them." It was Ivanka's Bible. That's what I mean by used as a prop. And have you ever held a Bible like that in your life? And to buttress his authority in a moment of racial conflict. It's about race too. I mentioned that earlier, that in the outlook of Christian nationalism as it's expressed in this country, black and brown Christians and their opinions don't count. In this moment, right, what faith is being used for is to deliver a message about authority in politics, about power, about who belongs or who owns. There, you get some theology associated with Christian nationalism. I start with a light example. Member of Congress Lauren Boebert, who claimed recently that Jesus didn't have enough AR-15s, near-automatic weapons, to keep his government from killing him. And I'm just thinking, how many sermons did she hear where Jesus would have, slaughtered his enemies rather than go to the cross for the salvation of the world? But more seriously, I saw this when controversies were more up about masking. It was a meme going around social media. The church in 2020 with sheep, right, wearing their mask, and what the church should look like, lions. And I'm a specialist in Revelation and apocalyptic literature. Whenever I preach Revelation, I actually start with this passage from chapter 5, where John is in the heavenly throne room, and he's told that the Lion of the tribe of Judah, the root of David, has come and he has conquered and can open the scroll and its 7 seals. And in the very next verse, after you're told to expect a lion, then I saw between the throne and the 4 living creatures and among the elders a lamb, standing as if it had been slaughtered, having 7 horns and 7 eyes, which are the 7 spirits of God sent out into all the earth. In Revelation, the lion never shows up. It's all lamb all the time. But in Christian nationalism, it's lion power. And when I saw this, and I thought about the primary reasons I was wearing a mask earlier, wasn't for me, it was to protect other people. Right? When did it become about me exercising my power to do whatever I want? That's my theological critique of Christian nationalism. That it's a distortion of the gospel to turn it into force rather than serving love. That it claims to represent all of us when it doesn't. So now I'm going to warn you. There's a lot of content. I was asked to talk about this. I first began talking about it in other settings. So I'm going to say a lot and move fast sometimes. I don't usually like to do that. Just fair warning, right? But let's think back, right? We've grown up in a nation where civil religion is fairly prominent. Every president of the United States has professed a church membership. Presidential addresses have tended to end, God bless the United States of America, right? We're used to blending of faith and national spirit. None of that is new to us. What is new is the idea, I wouldn't even say it's new, it's always been held by some, that the United States is and should be a Christian nation specifically, and follow Christian laws because it was founded by Christians. John Faya is a colleague who teaches at Messiah College. He's a nationally known historian. Sometimes you'll see him on the news. A few years ago, John wrote, "Was America founded as a Christian nation?" And his answer is, it's complicated. It's complicated. The folks who settled Massachusetts certainly set out to found a particular Christian experiment. The folks who settled Virginia were Anglicans and were in it for the money. Folks who settled Massachusetts were Roman Catholics. We're in Pennsylvania, right, where religious plurality was there from the start with Quakers. Different parts of the United States have different starts. and different founding fathers had different opinions. And so it's always been messy. It's always been messy. If you're Christian, it would be natural, it is for me, for my faith to influence my politics. It does. So I'm not arguing that Christians shouldn't be involved in politics. I'm not arguing that Christians shouldn't have our political outlook shaped by our faith. I believe that. What I'm really interested in getting at, though, is the notion that all Christians should think the same things, right, and have authority over everyone else. Out of that. So I want to share, because you all have different backgrounds in terms of religion and all that, but Christian nationalism, as we experience today, has basically two threads, two different groups shaping it. And most people aren't aware of that. A lot of us are aware, there's Jerry Falwell up top, of the moral majority, right? Jerry Falwell and other Christian leaders began to coordinate their activities, to have a strong voice in public policy. One of their driving issues when that movement started, they talked, I'll hold that off for a little bit, but here's Falwell saying, I hope to see the day when we don't have public schools. The churches will have taken them over, and Christians will be running them, right? That would be a Christian nationalist outlook. We're familiar with that stream. Falwell was a Baptist. But another stream that some of you may have experience with is out of our Pentecostal stream of Christianity. It goes by a lot of different names: Network Christianity, the New Apostolic Reformation, you name it. But this is another stream, and it's been extremely influential in our politics over the past 8 or 10 years. It's a group of Christian leaders who claim that they get direct new revelation from God. They are prophets and apostles in this age, and they are in alignment with one another. That's the language they use. They're in alignment with one another, so their authority comes straight from God, but through also their network with each other. Here's one of them, Lance Wellnow, saying, on today's broadcast, we'll be talking about Jesus' 2,000-year-old prophecy about Israel. Oh, what's happening in Canada? Cyrus Trump. That's a thick idea. The idea in this group is they declared by prophecy, what they call the Word of God, that Donald Trump, like the biblical Persian King Cyrus, who might not be a believer but was called to deliver God's people in a new age, right? And he goes on. That movement, the New Apostolic Reformation, if you watched around President Trump, his circle of religious advisors, many of you would have recognized Paula White, who was very prominent in that group. But you would also seen a guy named Robert Jeffress, who is Baptist. That circle of religious advisors comes from both of these groups, who, when I was growing up, Baptists and Pentecostals just argued with each other all the time, right? But in Christian nationalism, they found ways to collaborate, or at least these groups of them. This is what I started to share a little earlier. The roots of the moral majority movement. When we first heard about them in the 1970s, they wanted to talk about two things. They wanted to talk about abortion and what they were then calling homosexuality. And they said, this is our agenda to build a new, restore an old morality in the United States. The truth is, they started meeting when the federal government refused to give federal funds to Bob Jones University because it didn't allow black students to enroll. Until 2000, it didn't allow interracial dating. And so the federal government said, if you do racial discrimination, you can't give federal loans. You can't get federal grants. I I'm in higher education. We depend on federal loans, right? And they began to meet, how can we do it? In one meeting, Randall Ballmer, who teaches history at Columbia University, said that one of the more famous leaders of the movement, Paul Weyrich, said animatedly, the religious right didn't come together in response to Roe. No, what got the movement going was the attempt on the part of the IRS to rescind tax-exempt status of Bob Jones University. Ballmer was in the room when they were having a 10-year celebration of what they'd accomplished when this was shared. Now, on the New Apostolic Reformation side of things, I'm trying to watch my time and be really good with time, but I found out about them about 10 years ago. One of my closest friends from childhood, I mean, you want to talk about close, he played quarterback and I played center. Back before everybody ran the shotgun. And we went to seminary together. Let me know he was coming to town for a conference. And I went, the Marriott was fairly new, and I thought, how do I teach at a seminary in the city of Lancaster, and 1 mile away there are 5,000 people at a religious conference, and nobody told me? But he came in from Nashville for this, and I heard someone talking about what they called the 7 mountains of culture. That Christians are called to take dominion over business, government, family, religion, media, education, environment. And I thought, where did this language come from? I've never heard it before. And that's when I started snooping around. What is up with this? That there's this movement that wants to take, this is language I had never heard as a Christian, wants to take dominion over culture. That idea emerged out of the New Apostolic Reformation, and it drives lots of churches in Lancaster County. I have close friends who attend some of these churches, and I don't know if they know the church teaches this, because a lot of churches don't share what they really do with people who come. But it's a significant thing. So I just wanted to lay that out as a way of short version of background about the movement. It is helpful to understand that it has these 2 different streams that sound different in different contexts if you're paying attention to the news. This is the church fundraising magazine of a Christian academy here in Lancaster. This spring they had invited Charlie Kirk, who was one of the founders of the Falwell Kirk Center at Liberty University. He was the spring fundraising speaker. Every issue, I won't tell you how I get to see these issues, but every issue is about politics, not formation of children as Christians. Every issue. This issue was about restoring education. And how do you restore education? What they were really up about was, and I don't know why Christians would be all worked up about it, they wanted to trash critical race theory all through the issue. And I thought, had any of us ever heard of critical race theory more than 2 years ago? Actually, I had, because I read in it and use it. So it caught my attention, but I know how rare it is. And then all of a sudden, it is all over the news, right? How did that happen? Well, it was a political move, right, to make a wedge issue around race, and it gets into a Christian school academy, a Christian academy, right, and their literature for fundraising. In Lancaster County, in a sermon last week, a friend shared this with me. A pastor talked about how 3 members of this little church are on the school board, and it's a largely Republican school board, but they haven't been winning votes on contested issues. In the sermon, they said, "We on the school board have noticed something. There's a demonic warfare going on in that school board. The enemy comes over that board, and we're constantly losing conservative votes 5-4 on a predominantly Republican board. In other words, if we don't get our way, must be the devil. So, a couple of resources if you're interested that I have found particularly helpful. And I left, being a nerd, a bibliography out front on the table there if you want to try. But these are two. Aubrey Hendricks is a New Testament scholar who is black and has interest in black theology, has written Christians Against Christianity, arguing that Christian nationalism is anti-Christian. I don't really think it's anti-Christian. I think it's a stream of Christianity. We have to own it. My opinion. But he makes a biblical case against Christian nationalism, and that's worth reading. And then two evangelical sociologists, Andrew Whitehead and Samuel Carey, have written Taking America Back for God, Christian Nationalism in the United States. Lots of charts and graphs and surveys and numbers because they're sociologists. But they use those numbers to try to get at what Christian nationalism is. How do you recognize it at work in people? And this is what Whitehead and Perry argue. When you survey lots of people and cross-check one question with another the way sociologists do, I just told you everything I know about what sociologists do. But when you do that, what you find out is that Christian nationalism often influences people's opinions and behavior in the opposite direction that religious commitment traditionally does. And I'll begin to track that out a little bit fast. But the argument is that folks who identify with Christian nationalism in the way they measure it, typically, this is why they diverge from African American Christians, for example, typically less than what church-going people have said in the past. So here are some examples. What they do, these are the questions they use to find out. So if you ask a survey with 150 questions, they sneak in 6, right? To get at what they're really looking for. Should the federal government declare the United States a Christian nation? Should the federal government advocate Christian values? Should the federal government enforce strict separation of church and state? I put that in blue because Christian nationalists don't believe that. They believe the others. Should it allow the display of religious symbols in public spaces? Do they think the United States, our success, is part of God's plan? Because part of Christian nationalism is to believe that God has a special favor for this country among others. I'm not in a pulpit, but a kind of role. That's idolatry, to think that God has a favorite country. Should the federal government allow prayer in public schools? Well, one of the things they found out, so this is the scale of their questions. They rate everybody from 0 to 24. How much of a Christian nationalist are you? And what they're at with this set of questions is, how sure are you that you're right about your opinions? 24 is the high Christian nationalist scale. Christian nationalists are more sure. The more Christian nationalist you are, the more sure you're right about everything. I mean, when we open worship, right, we were greeted with a welcome that says we might struggle with some stuff. We've prayed about that. We might have questions. Not so much in Christian nationalism. What are some of these findings? Well, Robert Jones, who will be here in Lancaster soon. The Pennsylvania Council of Churches is having him. He's the CEO of Public Religion Research. Robert Jones writes that one of the most remarkable consistent findings in contemporary public opinion data is the chasm between black Protestants and white evangelical Protestants in their opinions. So let's get at what some of those are. Oh, this is new. I saw this. When they study racism, this is what happens. This is a scandal. White Christians are far more likely to voice racist opinions on matters of public issue than white people who don't go to church. I need to say that again. White Christians, and white evangelicals in particular, are more likely to answer questions coded as racist, in ways that are coded as racist, than are people who don't go to church. In other words, and I work on this with our students at Lancaster Seminary, is our theology toxic? So, what do they believe? White Christian nationalists believe that whites and Christians are the most persecuted groups in America. If you ask them, they are more likely to experience discrimination as white people than are black people or Hispanic, Latinx, choose your terminology, people are. They will say it's us. They're more likely to approve of authoritarian tactics like demanding respect for national symbols and traditions, standing for the national anthem kind of things, right? More likely to have fear and distrust of religious minorities, Muslims, atheists, Jewish people. This is the quick part. More likely to condone police violence toward black Americans and distrust accounts of racial inequality in the criminal justice system. More likely to believe racial inequality in education, health, income, wealth is due to the personal shortcomings of minority groups. They're more likely to report being very uncomfortable with interracial marriage and transracial adoption. They're more likely to hold anti-immigrant views. They're more likely to fear refugees, which, by the way, in Lancaster County, which used to be, I guess still is, the #1 destination for refugees in the United States, we're watching public opinion in Lancaster County turn in the past 6 or 7 years on that, with the effect of Christian nationalism. They're more likely than most people are to oppose scientists and science education in school. They're more likely to believe that men are better suited for all leadership roles, while women are better suited for caring children and for the home. And I just love to point out when I get in one of those conversations that if you go to the hospital, your chances are better if your doctor is a woman. Loads of research on that question. So, when you think about that argument that to the degree that people identify as Christian nationalists, they tend to hold opinions that run counter to what has traditionally been identified as Christian opinions, you begin to get at what Christian nationalism really is, which is about me and us and people like me. A political scientist named Evan Stewart at the University of Minnesota noticed that people who are high in PRE, public religious expression, I've always been reluctant to put like any kind of Jesus or church bumper sticker on my car for fear that when I cut somebody off, they'll say, I knew they were all like that. But folks who are big on religious symbolism in public space also are more likely to show intolerance toward groups they dislike, whoever they would be, which is tragic. Here's one, and this is where I'm headed. Christian nationalism is a threat to democracy. It is anti-democratic. This is that same scale of how many of the questions keyed to Christian nationalism in survey data depending on how strongly you identify as Christian nationalists, the right end of the scale, how many people are likely to argue that voting is a privilege and not a right? And think of the work that's happened in the past 10 years to make voting harder in the United States, and particularly in ways that target poor people, people of color, and students. Right? The idea that voting is a privilege, not a right. I never heard that growing up. On January 6, 2021, lots of Christian nationalist symbolism. Here, breaking into the Capitol, we have Jesus next to a Trump flag, right? That's Christian nationalism. Whitehead and Perry again. It appears to be unmoored from traditional Christian ideals and moralities and oriented toward authoritarian figures. You remember what I said about the New Apostolic Reformation? If you're a preacher and your authority comes because God speaks to you directly, that's authoritarianism. I visited a church here in Lancaster County years ago just to see what it was like, and it was right after New Year's Day. And the pastor got up on stage and said, I just want to share with you my vision for the church this year so that we can all be on the same page. Right? In other words, I'm telling you what we're going to do because I'm the pastor. Traditionally, my background is Baptist. Baptists were extremely against that opinion. And over the past 30 years, more and more insistence on the authority of pastors has filtered into Southern Baptist life. Threat to democracy. Chrissy Stroop, who is a former evangelical and actually a specialist in Russia affairs, but has started writing about Christian nationalism a lot, wrote a piece in Religion Dispatches, Russia and the U.S. have more in common than you think. Because Russia has its own version of Christian nationalism, Russian Orthodoxy as an identity that it is seeking to impose on Ukraine right now, because the Russian Orthodox Church says Ukraine belongs to it. This is not much reported, the religious dimension of that war. But about 4 years ago, the Ukrainian church was allowed to withdraw from the Russian church, and in the Orthodox world, they achieved autocephaly. They had self-rule. And Russia denies the legitimacy of Ukraine's religious self-rule. I'm in conversation with one of our former students who is Indian from the subcontinent, right? The nation India. Hindu nationalism is working the same way in India right now that Christian nationalism is working in the United States. Lance Wellnow, you saw a picture and a quote from him earlier, said, it's hard to make Putin the villain. This is just before the invasion of Ukraine. Hard to make Putin the villain if you have all the facts. Because the CIA and Hillary Clinton were trying to undercut Putin by what? Promoting LGBT folks in Russia? And Putin clamped down like a good dictator does. Republican candidate for Senate in Delaware in 2020, which means she didn't have much of a chance, said, I identify more with Putin's Christian values than I do with Joe Biden. These movements have been in conversation for a while. Last month, the Conservative Political Action Conference held its annual meeting in Budapest. And if you're a nerd like me, you've been paying close attention to the news, Hungary is the only nation in the European Union that has resisted sanctioning Russia because its dictator, Viktor Orban, who is a Christian nationalist in a Hungarian way, is aligned with Putin, and they were aligned with Trump, who is aligned with the Prime Minister of India. Before January 6th, Jenny Thomas, married to Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas, was corresponding with Mark Meadows, Donald Trump's chief of staff. And Meadows wrote, "This is a fight of good versus evil. Evil always looks like the victor until the King of Kings triumphs. Do not grow weary in well-doing." That's a Bible verse, right? The fight continues. I've staked my career on it with at least my time in D.C. on it. When your party winning is about the King of Kings and not growing weary in well-doing, you're in the world of Christian nationalism. And yeah, here in Pennsylvania, the Republican nominee for governor, Doug Mastriano, has been using a lot of Christian nationalist symbols and claim God is really working in our state. In November, we're going to take our state back. My God will make it so. If you're reading the headlines in the Lancaster newspaper, you're finding out that more and more there are white nationalists and Christian nationalist meetings happening in restaurants and bars here in Lancaster County and in people's homes in Lancaster County. It's becoming sort of a regular thing in the news that these meetings are happening. It's a little transparent that folks can tell that I tend to be politically liberal. But I never promote political liberalism. I'm not doing it now. There are a lot of things I'm not sure what I think is right politically or socially. There are a lot of things, I usually vote Democratic. There are a lot of things Democrats have done that I don't like, and I'm happy to say so. I can be critical of the folks I vote for, and I can be critical of people like me. And to me, that's an essential part of being a responsible Christian, is to live with transparency and discernment. Mark of Christian nationalism is there is no room for that, right? There is an agenda. It is God's agenda. And because it's understood as God's agenda, it needs to be imposed on the rest of the world. I'd like to invite you to do in your own reflection about this, because this is not my usual voice in this space. I'm comfortable. I've been able to give this talk in bars. I'm comfortable doing that. I'm not comfortable talking about this from here. What I invite you to do is go in your own reflection to the core of the gospel and ask that question with which we began: what is Christian freedom for? Whom does it serve? How does God call us to relate to our neighbors in the world? And so with that, may I call us into prayer. Our God, we acknowledge that we live in a society with deep, deep fractures and a church scandalized by deep fractures. We know what that looks like in the world and what it means to our neighbors. Our prayer would be that you would form us as people who live in love, in integrity, in freedom, formed to be discerning of the ways you would lead us to relate in the world and relate to our neighbors, forming us as people capable of being self-critical, reflective, honest, and gracious. Working through all of your people, O God, we ask that you would help us to be agents of blessing and healing in this world. We pray through Jesus. Amen.
Would you stand for this last song? Thank you, Greg. I think we should give him a clap of bravery for doing something that's not the most comfortable. I really appreciate your words. My eyes up to the hills. This my morning song, where my strength comes from. I lift my eyes up to the hills. This my evening song, where my help comes from. This is the gravity of love, just as the moon follows the sun. You're all around me. You're holding everything. This is the hope of every land. Just as the universe expands, your love is reaching. You're holding everything. We lift our eyes up to the hills. When will our help come? Lord, we cry, how long? We lift our eyes up to the hills. Even as we run, hope is chasing us. This is the gravity of love, just as the moon follows the sun. You're all around me. You're holding everything. This is the hope of every land. Just as the universe expands, your love is reaching. You're holding everything. Oh, 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 hold it all. Oh, 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 hold it all. Oh, oh, hold it This is the gravity of love, just as the moon follows the sun. You're all around me. You're holding everything. This is the hope of every land, just as the universe expands. Your love is reaching. You're holding everything. Oh, 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 hold it all. Oh, oh, hold it all.
Thank you. Thank you. It is moving to me to be able to be part of a spiritual community that doesn't turn away from things that are really difficult to swallow or to hear or to navigate or to know what to do with after you do hear. And I know so many of you, and I know that we walk into this space from unique places, and not just you, but we all have family members and friends who also come into these conversations from different spaces. This is hard. This is huge and important and hard and heavy, and I am so thankful to be able to walk with you through these times. Like Greg said, we're not a monolith. Like, we are not here to prescribe a specific path forward, but we are here to look at the world that we've been placed in and the relationships and the people that are in our lives, and to figure out how to love one another well, how to care for each other, and how to use the power that we have to elevate others and increase our freedom. We serve a God of love, and love wins, and love heals, and love restores. And how that happens is messy and hard and not clear. And I'm thankful for you and for the commitment that you have to learning to love one another, and to facing what we have to face and what we have to see, and for taking the next steps that we believe God is calling us to take as best we can. So thank you so much for joining us. I'm sure that you'll already do this, but go back and listen to what Greg shared as you seek God in your space, in your life, in your relationships. Go back and listen again. The video will be uploaded on YouTube. It should be on our website as well, and you can listen to it through our app. And take the time to be aware of where you enter this conversation and what God is calling you to consider and to think and to process, and what your next steps might be. So thank you for being the kind of space where Greg can come and share that. Greg, we're really thankful to hold this space for you to share that. It's super, super helpful to us. Thank you. We're better for it. I hope you'll have a wonderful week, and be well.